According to document 8168 under procedure climb gradient, the standard design gradient is 3.3%, which is 2.5% plus 0.8%, 0.8% being the buffer. Dear guests, welcome back to the channel. Today, let us talk about what is minimum acceleration height and maximum acceleration height in RTOW charts. Now, the RTOW charts stands for regulated takeoff weight charts. What does regulate means? In this case, to adjust. The speed is being adjusted for wind, pressure, etc. At the bottom of the chart, we see this minimum acceleration height and maximum acceleration height. What are these values for? Before we get into that, let us dive into the 4 segments of the initial takeoff. So, the first segment starts when you take off and from 35 feet up to raising the landing gear. Do check out my video on landing gear, by the way. What speed you are flying? It will be your liftoff speed, VLOF, up to V2 speed. Your minimum climb gradient is 0%. For 4 engines, it is 0.5%. Thrust is at toga or flex, and your flaps and slats will be in takeoff configuration. The next segment is the second segment. It starts once the landing gear is lifted up fully and all the way up to acceleration height. Speed you are maintaining is at least V2 speed. You are still on toga or flex thrust with a minimum climb gradient of 2.4% for twin engines and 3.0% for 4 engines. The third segment starts from the acceleration height, which is minimum 400 feet. Now, you are still at toga or flex if you are in single engine, and speed will be from acceleration from V2 to green dot. You will be accelerating and cleaning up the aircraft, the slats and flaps. On a special note, according to document 8168 under procedure climb gradient, the standard design gradient is 3.3%, which is 2.5% plus 0.8%, 0.8% being the buffer. As for straight departures, it is defined when the initial departure track is 15 degrees of the runway center line. When a departure route requires a turning of more than 15 degrees, it is called a turning departure. For this, a straight flight is assumed until the aircraft reaches a height of at least 120 meters or 394 feet. Hence, this is also when the minimum acceleration height is reached. Turning departure procedure normally caters for turns 600 meters from the runway, but in some cases, turns cannot be initiated before DER or departure end of runway, and this will be written down in the chart. So next question you ask, what is the maximum speed for turning departures? According to document 8168, it is 265 knots for category C aircraft, the Airbus A320. Last segment will be the climb segment at from green dot speed until 1500 feet AGL with maximum continuous thrust or MCT. By this time you would have retracted your slats and flaps. Well, if it's jam, well, do check out my previous video on A320 slats flap jam procedure. With the flaps and slats retracted and the gears up, your minimum climb gradient will be 1.2% for twin engine and 1.7% for 4 engines like the Airbus A340. So now we are enlightened with the 4 segments. Let us go back to the RTOW charts on the minimum and maximum acceleration height. The minimum acceleration height will ensure that a net flight path clears the highest obstacle by at least 35 feet when accelerating in level flight to green dot speed after an engine failure in the most adverse conditions. Do note that acceleration altitude never goes below 400 feet AGL. So the next question is, how do they determine maximum acceleration height? 2 conditions. Number 1, a minimum of 1.2% climb gradient when you are above the acceleration height. Number 2, green dot speed must be reached 10 minutes after start of the takeoff roll. So now, why 10 minutes? Because that is the maximum time that a single engine can be at toga thrust. So to calculate the maximum height you can be at, you need to know what is your climb gradient at segment 2 with single engine and at the worst and heaviest weight restricted by runway. You take 10 minutes minus the time you start your takeoff roll until V2 with engine failing at V1. Minus the time taken to retract the landing gear from 35 feet above the ground, which is the first segment, and minus the time taken for the aircraft to accelerate from V2 to green dot, which is segment 3. Once you do that, you will be able to determine the climb gradient of the second segment in single engine. Now, with this climb gradient, you are able to calculate the height the aircraft will be at, and this is called the maximum acceleration height. So to sum it up, the maximum acceleration height is the height of the aircraft at the end of the second segment with toga thrust on one engine, the other engine failing at V1 and at the worst and heaviest weight limited by runway. Why is this important? What happens if the pilot tries to climb beyond the maximum acceleration height at V2 speed? Well, he may exceed 10 minutes of toga thrust limit and thereby risking total engine failure even before green dot is reached.